Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast, where today is a very cool episode because I'm with a very cool person, dear friend of mine, someone who works with us, and we are going to chop it up today. So once in a while, you'll hear us do these segments called Chopping It Up, and today is one of those segments. I have with me the amazing Casey Traut. Can I call you still Casey Traut versus Casey Digby?
Yes,
Because,
works.
we got marriage coming up in just a handful of weeks now, right?
Yes, we do. It's like a little around 2 months now, a little under.
Man. And that's going to go so fast.
I know, it's already kind of feeling like a whirlwind, but it's fun.
Well, It's going to be great time. It's going to be, I know we're all going out there. It's going to be super fun for us to visit with you guys at the wedding and all the cool stuff.
And since it's not in Colorado, like the weather will be a lot nicer because it's going to be snowing here. So
Yes, a little AZ weather is going to be fun.
It'll be perfect. So
Casey, thank you for joining me. The reason I was really excited to have you on this episode is because you, among all the people I know, have this gift, and this gift is to connect with people. You're a great listener. You turn conversation, you guide it, but you're looking to connect, and you're doing it from a meaningful and genuine way. And so you don't know what we're even talking about, right? And that's the beautiful part of this.
Yeah.
And so what we decided as we were planning for the episode was I thought of you because I wanted to chop it up on connection. Now, as we get started on this topic, I think it's important as I'm looking at what, you and I have known each other now for a good amount of time as you've worked with us, and we spent a lot of time training and working and being out in the field together and all this stuff. Your story's cool, and maybe this is where connecting starts from, but I want to get a little bit of backstory and history before we start chopping it up in detail here. You were a college athlete, college cheerleader, and you became the captain of that team, and you had a lot of different parts to that. Talk to me and us about the connection between either team sports and leadership, team sports and connection, what you learned from, especially when you're at a college level doing these kinds of things. That's a different animal compared to just, non-organized, hanging out in a group. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, I feel like the biggest thing that I started learning from connection in that piece is especially when you're leading a team, you have to care and you have to listen. There's a difference between a boss and a leader. So like a boss just directs what you need to do. And sometimes there are times for that, when you need to get things done at a certain, timestamp. But like leadership is actually getting in the trenches with people. And so I had done cheer ever since like middle school, and then once I had done it in high school, I was very competitive there, and then had ended up being a captain there. And just as I transitioned into college athletics, like you said, it's a whole different ball game. It's a whole different beast, like because it's literally what you're doing 24/7 amongst being a student.
Right.
So I feel like the biggest piece of connection, especially from a cheerleader standpoint, is it's not just being a leader on your team, but you're an ambassador. So you represent not only your team and your coach, and really truly I went to Grand Canyon University, so you represent like that college, but you're representing yourself and all of those different things that come with that. So I feel like the biggest thing that I learned with that is being an ambassador, and not only that, but like as you're in that leadership sector, like I said, you just have to also be known and be genuine. Like it's not, you can't just like point to get something done or whatever and then not do it with them or explain in further depth. Like you have to really get to know people. So the genuine connection is really, really important. So that's the biggest thing that I learned from college athletics.
And, on that note with the connection piece, when you were working, whether at high school level or at college level, were you always a natural connector, or did that come with leadership in your experience?
It's so funny because my mom told me ever since I was young, I had no problem really connecting with anyone, and especially like adults, which in athletics, that's not necessarily what you need, but especially at the college level, like I said, being an ambassador, you have to connect sometimes even with the CEO of the college and different people, or you're going to nonprofit organizations and representing. And so you have to be able, especially if you're the captain, to walk up and say, hey, here's where we're going. What do you want us to do? And walk through that. So I feel like that was the biggest piece. And as I was growing into that, to your question of like, connection's always been natural for me. Like I also like hate awkward. So I like do anything, even if I can sense that someone else is not comfortable in a situation, I'll do everything in my power to make them feel comfortable, to make them laugh, open up about themselves, because everybody likes to talk about themselves. And so I like to do that. But, you know, to kind of answer your question, it's always come natural, but definitely being put in leadership positions has enhanced that for me.
Okay. And so when you were, I love what you said, and when you're talking about being an ambassador of we'll call it the brand, for lack of a better term. You're an ambassador of yourself, your personal brand, your team brand, your squad brand, the school brand. So there's a lot of brands that you're being ambassador for. It would make sense to me, and in my experience on team sports, feeling that same thing, you had to have a connection to all of that. If you didn't have a connection to the values of the school, it's hard to be an ambassador. If you didn't have a connection to your teammates, it's hard to be a great captain.
Yeah.
Would you say that you've seen that to be true in your experience? And if so, how do you go about making the connection with the people outside of just your immediate sphere, knowing that you're going to have to come into contact and you have to work with them?
So I think to answer your question about like the connection piece, as far as like being on the inside, and just to clarify too, your first question was like connecting with like my team, and like you actually have to be integrated into the school or brand or whatever. Yeah, I've seen that definitely to be true, because when your heart isn't in it, it's super apparent. And so that would be for anything. And so for a brand, whether it's like a brand or a company or whatever, if you're not fully integrated into that with like your mind, and like honestly, I think the biggest connection piece on that is getting to like really know the people around you, because if you don't dive into that, you can't feel as integrated as you should, right? So I think people really make every experience. And so to that point, yes, I think like that goes a long way if you are actually integrated. But if you're not, and you're kind of just doing your own thing, and like you're expected to be a leader or an ambassador, you don't know like truly the culture behind everything. And so how can you walk up to someone that's outside of that brand and explain every single detail of it and know that people care if you're not integrated or passionate or really, really care about what you're saying or how you're representing?
That's so good. Now, if we take that outside of we'll call it the university brand, or, you know, that the team thing. Now let's kind of move it into where people can really relate to, that might be watching or listening. And that is starting with their families and working out to the people that they work with, or the teams that they might be on, or the social groups that they're with. I think this is such an important topic to go through, is this connecting piece, because like you say, I think it's, you definitely have to be connected into the vision.
Yeah.
But you said something so important that I want to dive into a little bit deeper, which is sometimes I've gotten into causes and love the cause and then begin to love the people. Other times it's been the opposite.
Yeah.
I've fallen in love with the people, and what their cause becomes my cause.
Yeah.
You know, where I'm like, oh man, yeah, you're such a good person. Tell me about this and tell me about that. And they're so passionate about their cause that because I want to support them, then what can I do for their group, their cause, or be part of that movement?
Yeah.
So when we're looking at starting out with the individual, let's look at it. Let's maybe take it in rings. If you were looking at how you have to prep yourself, your mind, your heart to go into connecting with someone, and let's say that you know them already. Okay, so not a stranger, because you do both. You do, you know, you follow up with relationships we have, and you make new relationships for us here at the law firm in the community. If it's with someone that you know, how do you prep yourself to really connect with these people? Because you're not just communicating, you want to connect, as John Maxwell would say. How do you go about that?
So like, I think that's such a good and valuable question, because there is preparation to that. Like you can't walk into something and just assume that you're going to connect with someone. And obviously in this situation, like you're saying, I already know them. So with that, I feel like honestly, the biggest thing that I do to prep myself is giving someone my undivided attention and like getting my mind ready to do that. Because nowadays, and I can't like generalize, but typically people's brains are so stimulated with everything that's going on. So whether it's their phone and driving and meetings and all that kind of stuff, like in order to connect with someone, you have to give them undivided attention. So I feel like, for me, when I'm prepping going into that, even if it's someone that I know, especially with someone that I know, I just love people. So like, I want to go in and I love laughing. So I love to go in either with a joke or everybody says I'm really animated. So
you are.
So with that, like, people comment on that or they laugh just because it feels easygoing. So I think the biggest thing for me, what I'm prepping for, is that I just want them to have a good time. I want them to enjoy. I want to be able to ask questions about them, because connection also only happens when you're like going both ways. Like if you've ever talked to someone where you're asking a bunch of questions, or vice versa, they're asking you a bunch of questions, you're only giving like one sentence and not following up. There's no consistent communication in that. And then therefore you can't really build a relationship. So I feel like even if it's someone that I know that doesn't carry on conversation well, I just want them to feel comfortable. So I'm prepping myself knowing if it's someone that maybe they're not great at conversation, then I'm like, okay, then I'll carry it and I'll take that load off of them. And then if it's someone who's like typically great, they're very comfortable in their skin, all of that, I just know going into it that I'm like, okay, this is going to be a fun conversation. We're going to, whether it's business, like we're going to make sure we talk about business, but also hit on like, personal stuff that's fun for them to talk about too.
How do you prep for that? So you're coming to visit with me. Let's say we have either we're going out on a meeting together, or we're debriefing, or we're reviewing our week's activities, and you want to connect with me. Give us an example of what you do. Is it just a couple minutes before? Do you get yourself in a certain state? How do you prep to make sure that you're ready to make that connection?
Yeah, so I feel like typically what I do to prep for that connection is I want to do at least a little bit of research. I want to know like what I'm walking into. And again, if it's someone that I already know, then I'm like, okay, go back in your brain before this meeting and think about what you guys talked about last. How can you reconnect if there was, for instance, if it was more like a provider instance and I was going and talking to them and we've had some time where we haven't really been talking. I'm thinking about the last time that we talked, what was important to them. So that's kind of how I'm prepping myself of like that individual in particular, what is important to them and just kind of catching up. So if it's you and we're debriefing like with a meeting, again, I'm kind of doing my research on what I did and I'm like looking back at the week and being like, okay, what was productive about my week that I did a thumbs up, I would do that again. What is something that I thought was unproductive and I wouldn't do that again? It either wasn't super efficient, and how can I make it better? So then I'm going into those meetings I'm like, okay, I want to ask certain questions to make myself better. I don't want to repeat the same thing and then get the same result that maybe I didn't like. I want to do something better. So in that instance too, like I would also like to seek out wisdom and see how it could have been done better. So that's kind of how I prep for that.
Got it. I like you, I really enjoy people most of the time. Now, as I've gotten older, I've found out that I'm more secure in having alone time, but that has not always been the case. There was a time I never wanted to be alone. Like when I was in my, mid 20s and kind of starting to build my practice on the chiropractic side, I just needed people around me all the time.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older now in my mid 50s, it's a different feeling. It's like, I want to give to people and then I want to retract and recharge.
Yeah.
And I've found one of the arts that I've had to learn is because of that nature, trying to learn like when the connection happens by saying less. Have you ever experienced that where there's sometimes, man, when I meet someone new, or when I know that there's a specific thing going on, I want to dive deep and I want to go in. But there's sometimes in a relationship, even on a new one, if I sense something that we can connect with fewer words than more words, and sometimes that silence of just being together in the moment has a deep connecting piece to it. Have you found that?
Yeah, I mean, you made such great points of like, even like as you've gotten older, like you love people, but you also like to retract a little bit. And so there's that piece, which I totally get. But I feel like in relationships with people, yes, like I have felt that where I'm like, this isn't necessary to really carry on a ton of conversation or always fill the void of silence. Now, I feel like me, probably like most people, especially when you're trying to make a connection and you want that to happen, you want to fill those voids, you want to make sure that they feel comfortable. But I think it's kind of as you get more comfortable with someone, it's kind of like a significant other or a really good friend. You can sit in the car for probably 2 hours and not talk.
Yes.
And it's totally fine, and that's comforting, and it's really nice that you're known to that level that you don't have to entertain.
Right. So, yeah, I love that. Love that word, entertain. It's like we walk our dogs every single day, right? And so right now, for the next little bit, our daughters are living with us as they, transition from one part of their life to the next. They're both grown. And so we walk our dogs. Sean and I walk our 3 dogs, and then one or both of the girls will walk their dog as well. And there are some days where I really want to, talk and how's your day going to go? And there's some days I'm on that walk for me where I want to, because we live in the mountains and there's pine trees around and all this, it's the same walk every single day that we do.
Yeah.
But it can be different. And some days I want to experience the walk on my own, no matter who's around me. And I think that becomes a really important point as we communicate with others, knowing, are we reading the room? Are we reading ourselves to know also when we're not ready? Like there are times where if that's happening and, my wife and maybe Steph are carrying on a conversation where maybe I'll just back off in my pace a little bit so they can do their thing and then I can have my space. I'm just finding that to be fascinating. And so that's why I want to bring it up, because I'm sure people watching or listening, we always take the thought of let's talk more, let's connect deeper, let's dig.
Yep.
And there is time for that. And now I'm just realizing the beauty of silence at times, the beauty of minimalism at times. And it's just really fascinating. And with you, I mean, you're a connecting machine.
Well, thank you.
And seeing, where you're seeing that, because again, you have personal connections, you have business connections, you have family connections, all these things. It just fascinates me. And I don't know how you're experiencing that at, you're in your mid-20s. And so how that all feels for you like it did for me.
Yeah. And I think that is literally such a good point, even with your exact examples of like, that's more so like, that is your family. But even then, sometimes some people don't even still pick up on the thing in the room of like, it's okay to just be quiet right now. And like, let 2 people carry on a conversation, or I don't have to necessarily contribute to that to have it have value. They're finding the value, but maybe you might be finding value in being quiet and just listening. And so I think that's huge as a communicator, and even as like a leader, learning when, maybe it's not necessarily like a follower, but going back to like the team analogy, like if it was a teammate of mine and it was a baby freshman and I'm a senior, well, most of the time they do need the guiding and the instructing and the critiques and all that. And most of the time you are the one talking, but at the same time, there are times where you just sit and listen to them. Maybe they have an idea, or maybe they just need to get something off their chest. And so in that moment, it's like, you don't have to jump on it in that moment to tell them something that's correct. Right after, you can just be like, yeah, like I hear you, and I think that's valid, and then that's making people feel heard, which then creates trust, and it also creates this level of validation that's like unbeatable, because you're like, wow, like someone actually heard me, they repeated what I said, they were listening, I had value to that. And so you empower other people that way, and I think it's a great balance to learn of like, okay, this is where my expertise can really come in handy, and you'd probably have to lead the ship. And then there's other times where it's okay to sit back and be like, either someone else has got it or I'm just going to learn. And I think there's some awesome strength and confidence to that.
That was amazing. Like I unpacked some really good stuff out of that for me. And so I want to take that down a little bit of a trail now with respect to the concept of trust. Is there a technique, and I don't want to mean in a salesy way, but is there a tool or set of tools that you use to build trust with someone that you've never met? You're going to meet for the first time. Let's say it's a business meeting now. So now we're going from personal, now we're going to business. Let's go back to the original question. How do you prep yourself to connect with the person that you're going to be visiting with on a business level? And B, are there tools that you use to try to develop trust quickly in someone that will let you see, is this a relationship worth pursuing? Because I've been in relationships where, I've gone to a meeting, that first meeting, and after the meeting, I was cordial, I was social, I wanted to really learn about them. And at the end of that meeting, I'm like, they may be fine in one sense, but this is not going to work out in a business relationship. So how do you go about your process in a new business relationship?
Yeah, and like learning that trust piece. So I think to go to your first question is like, how do you prep for that? So again, it's kind of like doing a little bit of my research. I never walk in and don't know the name of the person I'm meeting. That is just, I've seen people do that. And maybe that's just like it should be common knowledge, but I've seen people do that with me and look and shake my hand and they're about to go into a meeting with me and ask, so what's your name again? And instantly I'm like, if you wanted to make a good first impression, you would have made sure you knew that.
Yes.
So with that, this is one small prep thing that I do that it really helps me. When I'm calling on someone new, in the email invite that I'm sending to them, I always, even on my initial phone call, I'm kind of building trust in that I want them to know that there's competency behind this phone call and we're going to get things done and I'm not going to waste your time. So I'm building that up front of like, okay, like, does this time work for you? Are you going to have enough time here? And I'm going to send an email invite. What's your exact email? And then from there, I'm repeating the email, making sure I'm not missing anything. And I'm also saying like in the email, for example, Ramos Law, in parentheses, my first and last name. So now at that point, I'm now kind of seeing, are you going to read the email and know my name when I walk in? And then I'm saying meeting with, Dr. Jim Hoven at Ramos Law. And then, so I'm putting all that information on there. So if they need to go back and look, they can take a peek. So anyway, that's kind of like how I first build that before I even go into the meeting. And then once I'm going into the meeting, again, it's all the common courtesy things that you would think. I know I'm going to walk in, I'm going to look them straight in the eye, again, re-say my name to give them a chance of like, okay, like in case they don't know, they don't feel awkward. So I'm setting the table, shaking their hand again, and kind of feeling out the situation of like, are you a leader? Are you going to lead me around your office? Do I have to say, hey, I'd love to see your office? So I just want to make people feel comfortable in that way. And that's how I'm setting my brain of, I'm like, I don't know what their characteristic is going to be like, but I want to come in with them knowing like, she's super friendly. This is relaxing. I feel like, wow, I could just talk to her all day long. So that's what I'm prepping for when I go in, and also prepping from my side of, let's say it's a doctor's office that's in suite G3. Well, that's really easy to not write that down in the invitation, then make yourself late by not getting there like on time by knowing which suite it was. So for me, I also prep with that of, I'm like, I know the details of where I'm going. And in that way, I can walk in with confidence being like, okay, I'm looking for this suite number. I'm looking for this building number. And I'm also not afraid to ask if I really don't know and there's someone around like, hey, do you know where this office is? So I can make sure that I'm prepared and ready to go. So I think that's on the preparation piece for sure. And then I think as far as like building trust, it all leads up because of my preparation piece. I want someone to know that like, while I am representing the firm, for sure, that's what I keep in the back of my head is I am an ambassador and everything that I do reflects everyone at the company. So in that moment, because they don't know Dr. Ramos, they don't know you, they don't know whoever, they're going to go based off of their knowledge of me, how the firm behaves. And so with that, I'm like, okay, I want this set up in a very professional manner, in a lighthearted and friendly manner, in a manner that's like, we'll get down to business, but also like, we can totally be friends if we're making that connection, So I think the building trust piece is the competency up front, because I really appreciate that in conversations. And I think also, building trust that I know if they ask me a question, this was the biggest piece of advice I was given when I first started working here and I knew nothing about law, was that if you don't know the answer to a question, there's an expert sitting across the table from you that is going to know that you don't know the answer to the question if you're going to try and make it up. So for me, they told me that because I appreciate competency. So maybe in those moments when I didn't know the best, I might have felt incompetent, but I was told from someone that they were like, hey, it is completely fine to tell that person across the table, that is a great question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm going to check for you and I'll get right back to you with the answer. Maybe like tomorrow, or can I call you? So that way you've made that trust level of like, she's going to be honest when she doesn't know something. She's not just going to tell me something that she thinks and like conjure it up because again, a professional is going to be like, I don't want to think. I want to know, like, what is the actual answer? Where do I go for this? So I think that's a big level of trust, is being honest that you just don't know something. And when you do, being able to like articulate that in a manner that they understand, that can provide value for them. So hopefully that answered, both those questions.
Oh, that was great. No, it was perfect. And I remember as you were learning about PI, right? Personal injury. And I remember the times that you would spend with Carrie, the attorney in Arizona, myself, Daniel, even Ian in some respects, like all the people that you were spending with. You were a sponge, you were growing, you were wanting to learn, in part because of it's who you are, and in part because of now, as you shared with us, that's your ethos and your standard for building trust. As I was listening to that, I was taking notes, and one of the things that came to my mind was the way to build trust is deliver on your promises, right? And if you want to connect with someone, if you're delivering on your promises time and time and time, you're going to gain a deeper connection through that trust. So you're doing that through a follow-up email and saying, hey, Jim, here's our time, here's this. If you have any questions, let me know. Then you've done your research, so you know what Jim does, what he's about, this and that. Then you show up on time. Then if the meeting's 30 minutes, you let them know at 30 minutes, hey, do you have any more time after this? Because I know we planned for 30 minutes. I want to respect your time. All of that is fulfilling the promise of doing what you said you were going to do. And that builds trust, and that builds connection over time. I will share with you something that if you were to ask me that same question and say, in a situation where I'm just meeting someone for the first time, how do I try to make that connection? I think I like the trust thing too, but I realize trust takes time. And so that's a little baby step piece. One of the things that I've found has worked really well for me is asking quality questions. And at first, making it about that person until I find out where they're at. And really, you nailed it from my experience too, listening. If I'm going to be there with you and I truly want to make that connection, okay, I'm going to ask some good questions about you. Questions like, so tell me more about you. What do you love to do? And so this is your work. Okay. And if I know what their work is, now we talked about providers, right? Going into different healthcare providers. If I know they're a chiropractor, which is what I do, then I would say to them, oh, how long have you been in chiropractic? And what made you want to be a chiropractor, right? Here, there's story behind the story. Now, and be genuinely interested. I've always found that helps me know that, or helps them know that I'm truly interested in them. And that has helped me in cold call settings, if we want to call it that, build a level of trust, or at least connection on the way to trust. And so you and I have done many meetings together with first time people. And I knew right away that you were great at doing that. Even when you weren't, like you said, you weren't trying to fake it till you learned it. You were just wanting to be a sponge and learn it. But remember how this was an interesting thing that we did. We would go to these meetings, and the very first meeting, I did most of the talking and you did most of the listening, but yet it was always incumbent on me to find a way to have you be a significant piece of the meeting, right? Otherwise, why would you be at the meeting? And so, because I wanted that person to feel like you played an important role. So that's where, like you were talking about the team lead as the captain and listening and going through that. That's exactly the same thing as you and I were working the process. You had no knowledge to be able to carry a conversation past the 5-yard line on a 100-yard field. So I needed to take that mantle, let you see how things worked from one perspective, which was mine, but yet still make you feel empowered to share your story. Because then what would those doctors do? They would always go like, oh man, well, Casey, because I would, lift you up and say, no, Casey comes from this background, this is it, and she's so cool, and this is what she's going to be doing for us. And then that opened the door for them to now share your story about who you are and you were learning. And then quickly, because you caught on so quick, it switched where I would do the introduction and start the process and talk about the specific nitty gritty. And you talked about the business side of things and what we were doing. And then it wasn't long after, one of the best moments of my life here was when I flew out to Arizona to meet with doctors you had set up, and I was your wingman, where now you did most of the talking because you had the ability to make the connection very fast. And all I did was, answered questions that you guys would have of me. And so I was in the background. Watching that transition was beautiful for me. And so I think all that being said, when it comes to how you make a connection with a person, it's really about understanding what your strengths are. Right? What do you bring to the table? And then magnifying that alongside your preparation. So from that perspective, now take us on a journey of how do you stay connected? So now we've kind of covered the ground of a new person. What about staying connected? Because we all know you can meet 100 people, and if you have 100 not real relationships and you get 100 business cards or you get 100 people at some fundraiser that you go to, it doesn't really mean anything. So how do you follow up and how do you deepen connections?
Yeah, so that's a great question, especially because literally my job is to do that. So I think for me, it's, this was something that we had talked about that really, really helped me. And then I started looking at that frequently of like, okay, how much am I following up with certain people? So when you go into that kind of like you were saying, initial meeting, you're getting a feel for like, does this person in their business have the same, values as our company? And so you're trying to see if like that would be an initial connection. And then that's kind of the basis on how much I follow up with someone. Now it's not all contingent upon the first meeting. Everybody has an off day, everybody has a great day, and then all of a sudden maybe that was just their best foot forward and that it's not what you thought it was going to be. So I think, that was kind of a pill for me to swallow, because I would walk out of meetings and be like, that was amazing. And then I thought it was going to be everything and more. And then it just wasn't, no matter how many times I followed up. And so I was like, okay, so let's try and see this as not a sprint, but a marathon of like you said, trust is earned as time goes on. And so with that, I would say that's a big learning point that I had to learn, that like trust isn't just like given. There's some people that are like glass half empty, glass half full, and maybe they just trust you right away, or maybe they just don't at all until you earn it. But besides that, I think strengthening the relationships, there's some people I just hit it off with because of personality. And so with that, I'm typically texting them. It's not emails. I'm like, hey, how are you? And if I hear something, for instance, I just had a woman that I connect with very well. She's her own independent like marketer for a couple different providers' offices. And she had texted me, and we're trying to get together for lunch when I go out to Arizona next week, because I wanted to make that a priority. So I followed up, even if she didn't answer, because I wanted to make sure I was getting time with her. And, in that instance, she was like, hey, like, sorry, it took me a little bit to get back to you. This should work. My grandmother at 104 just passed away yesterday. So I'm helping out with, my grandfather and everything. And so in those moments, I'm like, this is like not, in this moment, it's not a business conversation. Like, this is on a personal level. Are you hurting? Like, are you okay? And I am not afraid to break into that personal barrier. Like, I want people to feel like, I don't want to brush over that. So that's not something you brush over. Like, someone in those moments is comfortable enough to say that to you. And it might be a little cry for help in that moment of like, I might just need validation or be told like it's okay. Because I know I've been in those spots. And so in that moment, that is instantly a deeper connection, and not even, to your point where you were saying earlier, not just for sales. Like, that's like, I want to be your friend. I want you to be able to lean on me if you need anything. Like, and so in that moment, I think that's how they really get deepened, with the solid relationships. And then the ones that are like, maybe they really are just business and you talk a little bit about personal. Kind of to go back to what you had helped me with was category 1, 2, and 3. And it's different things of like how you connected with people, how the business model goes. So category 1 would be like, you follow up with them every 1 to 2 weeks, and sometimes maybe more, Category 2 is like, we hit it off. It's a good relationship. Are we going to talk all the time? Not really, but we'd like to share business. But, it's good. Anytime we see each other, it's great and whatever. Then category 3 is like, we connected, but I don't really know if we're going to serve each other that well in business. And so I'll check in on you every quarter and just see how it's going, see if there's anything that I can help you out with. So I think that was a good basis for like reevaluating that list often, of being like, well, maybe one provider that I didn't think it was going to be a great connection moved up to, all of a sudden we're doing referrals back and forth. And I'm like, okay, they're going right to my category 1. If I want to follow up, I want to see, what's going on. But to all encompass that, I think the biggest thing that I do, it's at first emails, but then I try to personally, if they're okay with it, get their personal number so I can text them. How are you? Do you need anything like with the business? Is there anything that you need from me? Anything I can help you out with? And then also like even stopping by and being more personal with, sometimes people bring treats, but not everybody wants donuts and cupcakes. Maybe they want veggie trays. And I literally had a provider the other day. I was like, I'd love to stop by and see your staff. And I was like, what are you guys feeling? Like crumble cookies, Dutch Bros, or do you want like a veggie tray? And he was like, we like veggies. And like, if I didn't throw that out there, I would have just brought them cookies that they didn't want. So it's about, again, asking those questions. And then that's more of like like they literally brought us vegetables, which is what I need anyway. So with that, hopefully that answers the question of like, it's being intentional about follow-up, because I also had literally someone that I met through a mutual connection. I really wanted to connect with her. Like, is a district manager for like auto body shops in like 8 different states. And I was like, I'm going to connect with this person. Like at some point we are going to meet. I know that they're busy. And so I incessantly followed up. Like I just didn't give up. I was like, I want to meet with this person, like, and we're going to see how it goes. And they had rescheduled on me. And then I just decided, I was like, okay, I'm going to follow up again. And they were like, okay, we're meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. And I was like, okay, great. And so then when we met, she at that moment was like, you were like not going to follow up with me. Like she was like, you, and it wasn't even in a way that was like, don't follow up with me. She was like, I just knew you were serious. And I knew you really wanted the connection. You weren't going to follow up with me once. And because I had to reschedule, you weren't going to meet with me. So with that, she was like, you were intentional about wanting to do this meeting with me. And so with that, I think it's all like intentionality, getting good feel, and making sure you I don't know, like really do want that connection with them as a person and their staff, versus just like, how can we do business? And that's it. Very important, because at the end of the day, it's been said oftentimes by, I've heard you say it, and people, like we've said it as leadership. We share that a lot around here. People do business with people that they like, people they want to do business with. And that's as a foundational piece. Of course, there's going to be a great opportunity that you may not be best friends, but just such a great win-win for one side or both sides even, that you're going to do that. But the day-to-day operations, the things that you do on everyday basis, man, you want to have a connection with those people, because some days are going to be amazing and some days are going to be tough. Yeah. And it's in those tough days where those relationships, those connections that we made with each other, right? If you have a really tough day, you know that you can lean on me. Yeah. And if I have a really tough day, I know I can lean on you. And if I really screw up, I share this all the time with people, and I can't remember where I learned it from. I think my wife shared it with me, and I don't remember where we got it, years and years ago. It's called the bank account of trust and love. I've mentioned it on this podcast a couple of times. But essentially, you and I have a relationship, and in that relationship, the more deposits we put into it, our balance grows, right? Yeah. We get a higher and higher balance, which means that our relationship is stronger and stronger. Well, there's going to come a time in every relationship, virtually, I won't say every, but virtually every relationship is going to come through a time of testing. Yep. And that testing, whether it's in a intimate relationship like a marriage, or whether it's in a business relationship, a partnership, a relationship with a group of people, someone is going to have something to say that could be considered not fun or even hurtful. And if you have a large balance in your bank account of trust and love, when you take that conversation, that person's going to consider it a withdrawal. Or if someone does something stupid in the relationship, that's a withdrawal. If you have a big balance in that bank account of trust and love, then you have a smaller balance, but the relationship, the account is still healthy and strong. Yeah. But if you haven't put in the deposits, if it's withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal, what happens? The bank account becomes empty and the relationship suffers or dies. Yeah. And so I think one of the things that I've found really important in connecting with people is knowing at just an intuitive level, where is my balance at in these relationships, right? And how much time does each person need? What does deposits look like? Like, I'm still learning what my best frequency and tempo of deposits with you is. And there's some things that I do, like sometimes I'll just text you or call you and say, how you doing? Just like what you were just talking about, right? That is a deposit because I care. I'm thinking about you. And I have this process when someone crosses my mind that is not in my normal plan of the day, there's a reason. Out. Yep. There's a reason. And so even if it's not a long phone call, if it's a text, if it's something, just as I'm thinking about you, that's a deposit. But there are some people that I know need more structured deposits. And if those relationships are important to me,
then I need to put that time in.
Yeah.
So, that whole thing has just really worked for me as a barometer of how I'm doing. And when I forget it, I've watched every time where those relationships, they fade away from me a little bit. And let's face it, we can only serve X number of relationships at one time because of time, the rate limiting factor of time. But that said, even then, you ever had those friends, they're so deep that if you don't talk to them for a year or more, when you get back together, that relationship, there's so much balance in there that it's like you never weren't talking.
Yeah, it's
right?
like you never stop talking. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where the beauty of this connection thing comes to for me, Casey, is, all the people that I get the chance to work with, there's some of them I can invest, and I need to invest more time in as, trying to maybe help them in some of their skill sets or pouring into them, whatever I can to help them grow. And there's some people where just based on how we function at different levels of our hierarchy or our organization, where what their duties are, what my duties are, it's just about giving them a hug and saying hi. And that's a huge deposit for them, as opposed to someone like you and I. We have to spend time together for both of us to move this needle of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So share with me your thoughts about that whole concept of this different amount of, we'll say, volume of input or deposits that you make as you're going through your process.
Yeah, I took and sunk all of that into my heart because I'm kind of like we've been talking about, I'm huge on like connection and empathy versus like sympathy and really caring and all of those different things. So I think finding like the barometer of like how much you pour in is important. And so I think for me, it's really just about reading the person. What's their comfortability level? Do they want just straight to the point and just business? They don't want any mushy gushy because I just don't want it. Great. Then I'll just be like, cool, here's this, that, the other, done. They're like, thank you. And that's really all that they want.
Yes, and appreciate, by the way.
Yes.
They don't want the other stuff.
Yeah, because then some people just think you're wasting my time. And not in a mean way. They're not trying to be rude to you, but also some people are a lot busier than others and they're not trying to be rude, but they're like, I have all these other things on, my agenda that like, if they don't get done, I get stressed. So then they feel like you're not appreciating their time. So it's so true. So it is really, truly reading the room, and reading the person, after multiple interactions. And so that is kind of like how I see how much I should pour into you and what you really need versus like, are you just okay if I text you every couple weeks and you don't think really anything of it? You're just like, oh, they're just following up. Like I still have you on my mind and okay, great. Yeah. Thank you. And then there are some people, and it's particularly women that like really want the long conversations and the, how are you doings and how's wedding planning going and all that kind of stuff. So I think again, that's not necessarily a generalization, but that's what I've seen across the board throughout the last couple of months is that typically the people that I pour more into, are the people that really want to talk. Like they want to take time to talk and they don't want you coming in, coming out. So I think that's what I look at it as is like, okay, what do you need from me as a person in order to feel like this relationship is thriving? Like what do you value? Longer conversations, shorter conversations, more frequent follow-up, less frequent follow-up. And it can be completely good for them. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then just making sure that I'm remembering that when I'm talking to them, because maybe from my side of business, I need to be talking to you more. But if they don't need it and they're still thinking about me, then I'm like, okay, then I just need to like reel that back after a couple times, be like, okay, they really only want me dropping in maybe once every 3 months. And that's completely fine with them. So I think that's kind of how I see it on how much I pour in versus not.
I love that. And that sprung me on to something that I think that we should talk about for just a moment, and that is personality styles. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of different tests that people can take, but personality styles come in a variety of flavors, if you know what I'm saying. And so the style that I'm most familiar with is called the DISC personality style, where there's drivers, which are your type A personalities. And in those folks, you want to connect exactly what you said. When you're talking about just give me the bullet points, that's what brought this to my mind. What do you need? What do you want? Give it to me and we'll move on.
So true.
And if you try to go around that, they feel disrespected in their time, right? And so if you do that, then it's give them what they want. The next one is the I, which is the interrelater. And that's where you and I kind of fall onto the spectrum in where we want to hear the backstory. We want to know, we really want to develop conversation, and we're trying to bring people and groups together. Those are the interrelators. And then the S is the steady, stable person. They're kind of like the glue of any team or of any relationship, where they don't talk a lot. They're kind of behind the scenes. They make sure that that all the details are handled and that everyone has good experience. And then your C are kind of your control folks with respect to details, the accountants, the people that are all into the details. And all of those people, Casey, and I'm sure you've seen this, they all have a tendency to be a certain way. Like if you look at accountants, and again, not to overgeneralize, most accountants have a very specific mindset and how they go about their business. Whereas most, if you look at a lot of these entertainers, a lot of them have this flamboyant, really interpersonal side where they're the life of the party and all that kind of stuff. We all have all of them. We all have all of them, but not only by nature will some be higher than others. So again, for me, my natural is I, the interrelator. That's my natural. And then S is my next strongest one. So those two where I'm like, hey, I want to take care of you emotionally, and I want to make sure that you're okay. And I want to connect with you, but I'm also going to make sure that you have everything that you need to do your job. So, you know, feel free to tell me anything you need me to do. I got you, right? That's I and S. But in this role that I play in the business, I have to have a fairly high level of D, which is I have to be able to give instructions. I have to be able to set accountability. I have to hold people and myself accountable for our actions. That's more on the D side. But my C, when measured, my C in most of the time is below the midline. Below the normal line.
I am lower.
I am low on details, right? It's just, it's not my strength. So these things are natural. They're acquired. They're learned. But knowing the personality style, and the quicker that we can see that and categorize them into whatever framework that we use, the quicker we know how to connect. So that if you know someone needs that extra time, now you share that extra time because you can see that they're an I in their most part. Or if someone's really detailed, you talk to them about the details of whatever your relationship you're in. If they just want to connect in bullet points. And if they're very soft-spoken and they just want to know that everything's going to be okay, you can't talk to them in this tempo, right? Then you got to back it down. So that art of communication for me was a game changer. When I learned that's, man, I can't even remember, probably 15-ish years ago, that was a game changer to help me connect with people. Have you found personality styles to be something that you're aware of consciously as you go into these things? And if so, how do you navigate that?
And it's funny because I remember you talking to me about that even months ago. And so since I hadn't had it written down, like it's like now coming back to me, I was thinking of certain people and how they are in my life. And I'm like, wow, like even I know someone who is basically like a D, a driver, like through and through in my personal life. And my I tries to go in and like have a conversation. And then I wonder why sometimes it doesn't work. And so I'm like, oh, because they want me to like respect their time. And I'm thinking that maybe my time is being disrespected because they're not taking the time to tell me.
So important.
I think I've recognized that. I recognize that a ton in my personal life. I think when it comes to business, I definitely do, but I think it takes me time. Like I notice right off the bat if someone's very soft-spoken, and I know I'm very not. Like I'm very much like out there and energetic.
Gregarious.
And so with that, like I know in those ones, because I have really soft-spoken friends, and I'm like, okay, like in those moments, I'm like, maybe when they're talking, they really do want me to be the listener. So even though I like talking, I like asking them all these questions, I'm like, that's probably not how they feel loved. So I either need to be listening and so on and so forth. But when it comes to like business, I think I notice right away, like which ones they are. Am I super, super conscious of it? Not always. I honestly think I could be more. And I think that kind of falls into because I do so many introductory meetings where I'm trying to get that out there. I'm trying to, about like Ramos Law, especially out in Arizona where it's like we're smaller out there. And so for that, it's trying to get the point across to them, that we're trustworthy, a little bit of the backstory, hearing about them. We're trying to fit this all into one meeting where I'm watching them again. If they're trying to go faster pace, then I'm like, okay, I'm going faster pace. They want to go slower, then I'm going slower. If they want high energy. So it is just adapting. So I do adapt, but I think it also takes me time in a business relationship to be like, okay, you are consistently this one way. And so that's why I'm like, okay, I'm going to adapt to that when you want to talk or when I reach out to you, and I'm going to make sure it's quick or it's slow or it's high energy or whatever. So,
I've found the best relationships, the most intuitive ones are the ones where if I know what you need, then I try to meet that. And if you know what I need in my style, you try to meet that. And we ended up kind of meeting in the middle. So, I used to talk there was a guy who was a D. And again, I'm very high I and S. He was very high D and C. And so for me, I would write these emails. He would ask me a question, right? One question. I would write these paragraphs of answers and he would write back a response, thank you.
And you're like, why?
Thank you? What's thank you? No, you got to give me more on thank you.
You got to answer that.
You got to answer that. And so we had to learn to come together. And again, this is more advanced communication skill stuff that leads to these connections. But the more we start looking at least on handling it from our side, if the other person isn't trained or doesn't have this resource to learn it or isn't even concerned, then we got to operate, I think, out of grace and say, hey, I'm going to lead more towards you. And we're going to go this way as long as when you lean towards me, I still get what I need from the relationship.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No,
anyway,
I think that's so good. Yeah.
Good stuff. This has been amazing.
Oh,
I could talk forever on this. This because to me, this is the foundation of virtually everything in our lives is connecting with the people who are important to you. It's important. It's critical in family, even with ourselves. If we're not truly connected to who we are or connected in spirit to a higher power or connected to our smaller teams, to larger teams, we can't really meet our mission in life because we can't do it by ourselves, right? We need to be connected from the inside out. So this has been powerful. And as we end this today, Casey, I would like to ask one final question. That's this. Is there any piece of advice that you've either learned or been given along the way that right now serves you as a pillar of how you live your life? And if you would share that with us for the people watching and listening, that'd be great.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. I'm trying to think of all the things that I really have learned, especially like in the last year. I think, you've been a super big mentor of mine, and there's some words that you've really spoken into me that I'm like, man, like that's so, like, that's not just like a business tip. Like that's like my whole entire life. If I take that and run with it, things get better from there. And so I think probably the biggest thing, it's not like worded a specific way or anything, but it really is just like, I've heard it from you and someone else that like, give yourself grace as much as you would give someone else. And I think like just not, there's probably a more eloquent way to say this, but like just not overthinking as much, just like walk forward in confidence with that, and then give yourself grace as you walk through that, because for some people it's a lot easier for them to give their self grace and nobody else grace. But for me, I give a lot of other people grace and then not really myself. So I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice is like, give yourself grace when you mess up or when you, overthink something too much or whatever. So I think that's probably the biggest thing.
That's beautiful. And you are doing it. You're walking the walk, talking the talk, and you are such a great addition to our team, Casey. I can't thank you enough for spending time with me today. I know you got a busy schedule. I know you're traveling back to Arizona to do all the things that you do. So thank you, and much, much continued success to you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was so much value to me, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely.